Welcome to Skweeel, episode 6. A lot has happened since episode 5, and as you can probably tell, there's a bit of a change. Let me explain what happened. I knew from the get-go that I was kind of shooting myself in the foot when I chose to use the SSL 9000K, which is the most advanced analog console ever designed, in my opinion, in terms of signal flow flexibility. But I knew that I was shooting myself in the foot when time would come to start automating things, because the automation on this console, as well as Neves from that same generation, APIs, etc., you name it, the automations were designed primarily for hands-on use on the console, and then maybe a bit of tweaking of a mute that's come in a bit early, or a fader that's a bit low, etc. But they were never designed, those automation systems, to actually build an entire mix from scratch. And if you remember from a previous episode where I programmed a simple track, a simple channels, muting, unmuting, muting, unmuting, just creating a simple pulse, that took me well over an hour just to program that one single thing. So had I known back when I started the project that SAE Byron Bay, where I am again today, but in a different room, had I known that they would purchase an SSL Duality, which is the beast that we have here, I would have immediately thought, okay, this is a more suitable console for the project. I'm expecting the same quality in terms of timbre. So this is one of the things I have to do now. I have to go back a bit in my schedule of things and go over all of the timbres which I had explored on the XL 9000K and see if I can obtain them on the Duality SE, which is this one. So that will be the subject of today's video. And then I can move on to the actual automation of things. And I'll give you a little teaser today. You'll see how much easier it is to do, because in a nutshell, the comparison between the Duality, which is a newer generation of console, which is designed with DAW integration in mind, compared to the XL 9000, where that still wasn't the case. The DAW was still considered as this separate beast, as a separate multi-track recorder that you send your signals to and get your signals back from. So the big difference basically is that, and I will show you a picture in a bit, the computer system on an XL 9000K is a dedicated computer. And that too was showing signs of, especially around here in Byron Bay, there's a lot of humidity and the air is very, very salty. And no matter what you do, anything that's got electronic circuitry in it will be corroded faster than a knife fight in a phone booth. So the beauty with a newer generation of consoles where there is DAW integration is that basically the automation is your DAW. So if you can easily program mutes going on, off in your DAW, well, that's it. That's all you need to do, because then you can actually apply those mutes to the Duality. So let me introduce you to this new console. And the quickest way to do this is most likely to compare the differences between the XL 9000K and the Duality SE, then explain it from scratch. Difference number one, for instance, is that the XL 9000K in the main building has 56 modules in its chassis, whereas this one has 48 modules. Difference number two is the XL 9000K is an inline console, meaning every single module has two distinct paths, a monitor path and a channel path. And as I investigated in my previous videos, potentially 56 times 2 gives me 112 total signals that I could play around with, even though most likely I would still have ended up with 56 primarily. Getting the secondary path automated would have been maybe a bit difficult. Here, each module only has a single path, although earlier today, Jan Moets, the senior audio lecturer here at SAE Byron Bay, showed me the split mode on this console, which does allow you to mimic kind of an inline topology with a main channel path with your EQ and your dynamic section in it, and then a very simplified monitor path. And that's the problem. It's so simplified that we have yet to figure out how to actually add level control to that second path. If we can crack that, then yes, I could potentially have 48 times 2 Larsen effects in total. But at least I've got 48 guaranteed in the main path. And then, yes, if we can get this split system to work and have level control on that second path, which is crucial for my project, level control, I really need to be able to bring the signals in and out of the performance or mute them, unmute them to create different notes, etc. If I don't have level control, then I might as well not have a Larsen effect happening in that specific path. If we can crack that, then I would be able to have 24 extra Larsen effects, because that second path involves the buses, and there are 24 buses. So there you go. At best, 48 plus 24, which is quite a lot. And worst case scenario, 48 fully controlled paths, which is excellent. Otherwise, in terms of timbre, it should be quite the same. And this is what I set out to do today. Go back and test the different timbres. Why do I say that? Well, if we open the manual of either the Duality series of consoles or the AWS, which is the sister series, which is a bit smaller, both of them will say in the first few pages that the analog circuitry is based off of the world-renowned and acclaimed SSL 9000K circuitry. They call it the super analog circuitry. So what this means, and definitely on the Duality, is that the EQ section is exactly the same in terms of circuitry, and so is the dynamics section. So I am expecting similar timbres, either 100% similar or so close that a tiny bit of tweaking and it probably wouldn't matter in the final composition. One of the differences, for instance, is that there are more surface mount components in the circuit boards on this generation of consoles than on the XL 9000K. Whether that makes a difference in the feedback loop timbre, that's yet to demonstrate. So let's give it a go. The first timbres I had stumbled upon on the 9000K were the subtle squeal, as I nicknamed it, and the flatula timbres, which I obtained by simply having the insert send, which is right about here in the path, connected back into the line input. So a little reminder of what it sounded like on the 9000K. And now this is what it sounds like on the Duality. So there, that's the equivalent of the subtle squeal. And then if I were to push the input gain further, then we would get into what I nicknamed the flatula timbre on the K, which sounds like this, little reminder. And sounds like this on the Duality. So as far as I can tell, because I don't have access to the files of my previous episodes, they're back home on a separate drive. But I don't know if it's my ears, I don't know if it's the monitors, a combination of both. But it seems to me like the flatula is definitely very close in timbre. But I get the feeling that the subtle squeal on the 9000K has more upper harmonics, is richer in upper harmonics than the subtle squeal on the Duality. But I could be wrong. This could simply be my brain, my memory playing tricks on how I remember the signal to be. Once I will have edited this all together with the little pauses I made so I can fit in the comparison signals, we'll see whether I was right or wrong. I think I might be wrong. They should be identical. So the next thing I want to test is what happens when I include the fader in the loop. And this is achieved by having the direct out, which on these types of consoles is actually the group output, having the group output feedback into the line input. Let's try and see what that does. If I have the fader included in the feedback loop, and if that fader is at unity gain, and if the line input gain is itself at unity, I should be just below the tipping point or exactly at the tipping point. And then the slightest bit of positive gain should take me over the tipping point. There we go, either by doing it here or up here. And immediately I've noticed that there is a much smaller course over which the tipping point immediately takes me into those lower frequency notes and into a flatula. In other words, I can barely keep the Larsen effects in the high pitches of the subtle squeal. It all happens within, I'm sure you can't even see the fader move in the video. See, I can't even get it to start off at a pitch higher than this. That's the highest pitch I can get. And I've tried either using the fader or the input gain pot. It's actually even more difficult up there because of the physical indent at unity. So I've also tried, before I press record on the camera, I've also tried, well, maybe if I bring the tipping point somewhere else than at unity, by that I mean bringing the fader down and compensating with the input gain up there, something like that, hoping to maybe have a bit more of a progressive transition from silence to the upper frequency subtle squeal, and then into the mid frequency notes, and then into the lower frequency notes leading into flatula. But again, this is the highest pitch that I can get, and then immediately I get much lower pitches and inevitably flatula. So that's not very good news. Definitely on the K I had, even though it was also down to just a few millimeters, I had a bit more range to play with. That's not very good news in terms of pitch control. However, on the K, I tried to get very slow pulses happening, in the idea of having these pulses then trigger expander gates opening and shutting on other channels. And I could never get pulses that were slow enough. Listen to what I've got here now. I can definitely use this. It is slow enough that this will cleanly open and shut expander gates. I can even slow it down more by exaggerating both gains here. And I might be able to, if I apply even more gain with the EQ section, get it to be even slower. So there you go, an interesting trade-off between what I could do with the K and what I've discovered I can do with the duality. So now I've added the EQ in the path, and I've gone back to having the group output as the exit point, and still I have my line input as the entry point. And some very good news, hence the big smile, because listen to what I could never achieve on the K. Pitch control. Hallelujah. So on top of this excellent news of having stumbled upon the fact that I can actually control pitch quite precisely, this was all done by hand, over what appears to be a 4 semitone range, it turns out that the moment I have the EQ inserted, I can actually get those higher notes that I was missing earlier on. And I can definitely pretty much target any range that I'm after. So this is very good. However, I should also be able to get what I nicknamed the the throat-like effect. So a kind of Tibetan monk, kind of ring modulator type of sound, which I am giving you a bit of a reminder here. So that was achieved using the mid bands by applying boost to the mid bands. I cannot get those sounds. I'm unable to actually get those sounds whether I apply negative gain, so that gives me the different types of pulses. Yeah, it doesn't seem like I'll be able to achieve that particular timbre on this console. But I'd gladly trade that single timbre over the ability to actually control pitch, even if it's on a reduced range of 4 semitones. It's still much better than not being able to control it at all. Next on my list of timbres, which I had found on the K and which I now need to try and see if I can find again, was one which I identified as a pulse width modulation-like sound. And I've given it some thought since then, and it's actually completely normal that I achieve this, because the way I obtain that timbre on the K is by having the EQ section after the feedback loop. So taking the insert send point as the exit point, and then bringing that back into the line input, but so having the Larsen effect happen on a very short loop, and then having the EQ act as the VCF of a synthesizer. And I don't know why I was surprised about this particular result, because the moment we get a feedback loop happening, this generates quite a lot of harmonics. And if I were to take one of my two mid bands, which is what I had done on the K, and if I were to boost one of those mid bands with a relatively narrow Q, then of course, sliding the center frequency of that peak EQ is going to emphasize particular harmonics. And yes, that will sound like pulse width modulation on a square wave on a subtractive synthesizer. Same thing if I were to do this with the upper mid band. So yes, I wouldn't call this a new timbre, as it is absolutely normal that an EQ section would actually do this on a signal with quite a lot of harmonic content. Two more sounds which I would have been quite disappointed if I wasn't able to obtain them on the Duality are the frog calls and what I baptized as the constipated flatula that you obtain on the K when you activate the dynamic section in the feedback loop with the EQ off to start with. So a little reminder of those two timbres. First of all, the constipated flatula. And here's what it sounds like on the Duality when you activate the dynamic section. We get the same kind of timbre. Not necessarily that it's the timbre I'm going to use most, but it's good to know that it's there. But I would have been very disappointed if I wasn't able to achieve what I nicknamed the frog calls. These were quite interesting in the K, and this is a reminder of what they sound like. And they're achieved on the K if you activate the slow attack. And lo and behold, I've got my little frog calls. So I'm happy as a pig in the mud right now. Let's see if we can achieve the other timbres. Another timbre on the K, which was interesting, again obtained with the dynamic section, was something that I found sounded like a bit like ring modulation. Here's what it sounds like on the K. And this was achieved with a ratio close to 1. And as it turns out, we are getting similar kind of frequency relationships that you would get with ring modulation. So far, we're getting quite a lot of the similar timbres that we had on the K, apart from one so far that we weren't able to achieve, which was the, without any EQ involved, the high-pitched squeal. But I've easily found that with the EQ active, I can get that back. So far, I wouldn't even say that there's been a timbre missing, one that I wasn't able to achieve. The next thing I would like to test now is using the mic input as the entry point for the feedback loop. So the exit point is still the insert send. It doesn't really make a difference. I noticed when investigating the mic input whether I grab the exit point post-fader or pre-fader. So as expected, because on the K I ended up with ultrasonic frequencies, as expected I'm getting the same result here, meaning that without either the pad switch or the polarity invert switch engaged by having the default settings, I am seeing audio activity on the console's analog bus outputs, the master mix output of the console, but it's not making it past the anti-aliasing filters of the Pro Tools system because I have it rigged for video for 48K. That places the Nyquist frequency at 24K, and that gives me a bandwidth where the anti-aliasing filter starts its slope at about 20K. So I'm not going to bother creating a high sample rate session at 192, which places the Nyquist frequency at 96, giving me a bandwidth of about 80K where the brick wall filter starts. I'm not going to bother with that because I know that I'm not interested in using ultrasonic frequencies, but there, it's reassuring to see the same behavior. Now, the way I managed to get the feedback loop when using the mic input back down into the audible range, 20 to 20K, was by, for instance, either using the pad switch. That seemed to do it on the K, and it also does it on the duality. Or I noticed that using the polarity invert also achieved the same result. Again, I am not investigating in this research the whys as to why this is happening. This is beyond my ability to understand the electronics behind it, why a polarity invert would bring a feedback loop back into the audible range. But there we go. The good thing is that I'm achieving the same timbres, and this particular signal I actually nicknamed Sawtooth because it gave me on the K, and here's a reminder of what it sounds like on the K. It gave me a very rich harmonic content, pretty much every harmonic on top of the fundamental, which is the definition of Sawtooth. So let's hear what the duality does in that case. There we go. So definitely comes in handy. And again, with the EQ engaged, then I would definitely be able to have a bit more control over pitch because we're applying so much gain already with the mic input even at its lowest setting that adding more gain at the mic input stage doesn't seem to have any real impact on the pitch. But however, the moment we bring in the EQ, then we should be able to have much more control over a specific pitch range. There we go. One final sound that I'm not too disappointed that I'm not able to replicate was obtained by really pushing the mic input quite high on the 9000K, and it gave us the following sound, which I remind you. Which I came to nickname as tearing fabric, because that's kind of what it reminded me. I cannot seem to get that sound here, no matter what I do with that input gain. It just doesn't want to break up like it did on the K. On the K, it would actually cycle by itself without having to touch anything. It would really create this kind of siren effect sound. Whereas here, it's actually cleaner. And I've tried the, again, high impedance, low impedance switch, which is designed for ribbon microphones, doesn't have a huge influence. There is a setting on this console that the K doesn't have, which is a drive control. And it's got second and third. So I'm guessing this is kind of a way to color the signal a bit by adding either second order harmonics or third order harmonics. Or perhaps, I do need to read the manual, but I'm guessing maybe more odd harmonics or even harmonics. But first of all, I have to, if that's engaged, then disengage the polarity invert switch to again bring the signal back down into the 20 to 20K frequency range. But I'm not getting anything interesting out of that. I'm getting pulses no matter where I have the overall gain in my feedback loop. Doesn't introduce much of an interesting difference. So there we have it. The next session will be spent analyzing how the total recall system on this console is in terms of precision for storing and recalling settings. I'm assuming it'll be on par with the 9000K, as it's still a 10-bit storage system. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. I'm very, very happy with the results I got tonight. This is very, very promising. As always, if you want to try this at home, make sure that your monitoring levels are always very controlled. I always have the compressor on the master output, making sure that the levels never become alarmingly dangerous. Thanks for watching. See you next time.